Okay, we're going to start saying that the method was originated in the early decade of the 1970s, being this introduced by an educator that arrived from Europe called Caleb Gattegno, who used color sticks, or known as the Cuisinart rods, in order to teach initial reading, where the sounds are taught by colors. He introduced the silent way in a book called Teaching Foreign Languages in Schools, the silent way in 1963. The rods were called because of Cuisinart, the math teacher that discovered the use of rods to explain concepts that were difficult to understand.
When it comes to the aim and purpose of this methodology, the first one is to acquire fluency of speech, that is one of a native or near a native level of fluency of speech. When it comes to fluency of speech, what we are talking about is not only the fluency and the pronunciation of the speech, which is quite important in this methodology, but also in the sounds and also in the prosodic elements of the language, such as intonation or the stress, that are also very emphasized when it comes to learning to do the pronunciation correctly. There are also other objectives that these silent way aims for example, the independence of the student by relying on themselves or in their mates. This is why it is called the silent way, because the interaction of learners is limited. They part from the premise of teaching shouldn't be subordinated to learning, rather than students being bench-bound listeners of what the teacher is trying to explain. Students have to be very successful at expressing themselves according to these to the teachers that use this methodology. They should interact with their classmates. This method also promotes the inner criteria of the students in order to autocorrect themselves and to get better at the language by developing a self-awareness of what it is, the grammar and such. This is because it has to be the students who learn the language rather than the teacher, the one explaining every concept to them. So that they should develop their inner criteria and the learners should form a part of learning it.
Well, referring to the theory of language, learning a foreign language is not just about grammar and structures that we have to memorize. Gattegno views language as a substitute for experience, so experience is what gives meaning to language. If the student doesn't know how to express through it, only knowing how to answer, but sounding in such a robotic way, it will be useless. That is where a teacher should help in the learner's self-expression. This is related to two concepts that Gattegno introduced. The concept of semi-luxury vocabulary that is related to the expressions, to the words that we use in our daily life, and the luxury vocabulary that is more related to specific contexts, like political and philosophical discussions. However, Gattegno thinks that the most important vocabulary for the learner is that language, that part that carries informal expressions like phrasal verbs and slang, because without it, the student won't understand what the native speakers are trying to say. He, according to this way of thinking, brings a central role in instruction to two items, tokens and picture charts.
Okay, so according to Ategna, teaching should be a secondary to learning, and this is based on 2 points. The first one is that learners are responsible for their own learning, and they basically just manage it by themselves. And the second point is that teachers present the basic structures and weight the interest of their students in order to make them more invested in studying and learning. Also, Gatecno suggests that learning take place in 4 stages. The first one is the awareness stage, in which students are guided by the teachers to understand what there is something new to be explored by them. The second one is the exploration stage. Here, learners experience the new material through practicing it in order to build more comprehension. The third stage is the transitional one, in which learners automatize the new skills. And the last stage is the transfer stage, where the students acquire the skills and they start using it and living with them for the rest of their lives. So Gatecno's theory is actually not original at all. It is really related to previous ideas exposed by other authors. The first one is that learning is facilitated through discovery and creation. This is that, according to Brunner, 1966, discovery and creation are the pillars of teaching, and this happens with a cooperative relation is created between students and teachers, and the students become the main actors on the learning process. They're not just passive listeners anymore. The second idea is that learning is facilitated by accompanying physical and manipulative objects. Gatecno took inspiration from Cuisenaire to develop several objects that were intended to be used in the teaching process. So teaching of pronunciation, vocabulary, basic grammar, structures, and the objects were sound color cards, the spelling charts, the Cuisenaire roads, etc. And the third idea is that learning is facilitated by problem solving related to the material to be learned. Um, Gatecno proposed that students should do problem solving activities, which will help them solve things by themselves on an effective way, in an effective way, sorry. Because solving such problems is how they discover how to self-correct their own production, and it also makes them engage in their own learning process. This is all really related to the quote, the Benjamin Franklin's quote that it's on the screen. It says, "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I understand." As it was said previously, the best way for a student is to actually learn, is to be highly involved in their own learning process, like being an active listener and just not being an active actor and not just a passive listener.
Well, when it comes to the approach, there are diverse materials that we should take into account to understand it. First of all, at the left side of the picture, there is a pointer, and this is because being that the silent way does not involve the teacher actually talking and teaching the concepts. In some classes, we should at least use 15 minutes of pronunciation, and instead of saying the word that you want your learners or students to to say, you point it out with a pointer in order to, well, to show it and elect a response from them. Then at the right we have quiz and roads that are going to be explained by Valentina later. Next one, please. We have the sound rectangle chart. The sound rectangle chart is a wall chart with different color rectangles. Every color represents a sound of a speech of the target language, so that we can teach our students the phonetics and prosodic elements of the language when it comes to the speaking and listening of it. We also have the word chart that, in the other hand, has words that are written with the same color of the rectangle chart, depending on the phoneme, in order to make the learner pronounce correctly the words right away that are written in this chart. Every phoneme corresponds to a sound, and these words have these different colors corresponding to each one of them. Next. So we also have the field that has the possible spellings for every phoneme. Remember that phonemes have the same color of the rectangle chart. This tool is quite useful for English or any other language that does not have a one-to-one relationship of letters. For example, like one-to-one relationships of letters and phonemes, such as French or even Thai, that is a language that is taught with this silent wave method. So this is very useful for those kind of languages that are opaque, but not for languages, for example, Spanish, that has, yes, one-to-one relationship, that if we read a word, we are able to know the exact pronunciation of it.
Okay, so next we're gonna be moving into typical techniques. The first one is, as the name of the method, the silence. This is when teachers stay silent. This means that students have to turn their attention inward to them. They're gonna pay more attention to their muscles. They're gonna pay more attention to their way of thinking, because with their muscles, they're gonna work more on the pronunciation and the way of the thinking they're doing. They're gonna work more on the words and the grammar rules. The second technique is really help each other. They just help each other if they have troubles, if they encounter something that they don't know how to face. They just help each other like solve the problems. This is really encouraged between students in this method, and it's obviously meant to be on a cooperative way and not a competitive way. That's not the main idea. So another technique used is the mother tongue mirroring, which is basically the adaptation word by word. So it's like a translation, word by word translation from their mother tongue to the foreign language or the second language tongue. Another technique is the dictogloss, which is used to teach grammatical structures in which students form small groups and summarize that. The teacher prepares the text that contains examples of the grammatical form to be studied. Another technique is the information gap. This is where students are missing some or to solve a problem. So they must communicate with each other to fill in the gaps so they can all think together what it's supposed to be, what the gap is supposed to be, of course. Another technique are roads, the color roads, or so they can be used for anything from small tasks like simple commands. For example, you give them to your classmates. That's really something small, but they can be used for larger things or more important plans or objects, for example. And another one is the structured feedback or the self-correction and the finger correction as well. I'm going to be talking about this later on, but basically this is using non-verbal feedback to correct students, using gestures, using their hands, using their facial expressions, and mimicking a lot. Also, the finger correction is about using their fingers instead of their faces, just the fingers being used as a tool to help the students work on their mistakes.
So we should talk about the, sorry. Yes, we should talk about the importance of using materials, because this methodology uses these materials because we cannot talk with our students. So in order to illustrate relationships of sounds and meanings in the language that is to be taught, we use, for example, the rods in order to explain concepts. For example, if we show a rod that is bigger than another one, we say, well, this rod is bigger, and they do direct association. So teachers and students can use the materials, and if they have any difficulty expressing a concept or word, they can use them. And they can also use the rods in order to make forms. For example, there is some materials in the internet that show how they do, for example, houses with the rods.
In order to show how a silent way class would be, we are going to do an activity in which includes the how to arrange the days of the week, how are they ordered with the silent way method. So in this case would be with the days here, the colors that are corresponding to each day, and our chart here. So I need one volunteer in order to do this task.
I will do it.
Right. Well, so you should say the words that I'm going to show you.
Rod. Rod. The rod is yellow. Yellow is Wednesday.
So I need one person more in order to show the other
I'll do
days.
it.
So it would be
A rod is yellow.
yep.
Rod is red. Red is Monday.
Right. So I need one person more.
Can I participate too?
Yes. So I will show you again.
A rod. The rod is orange. Orange is Tuesday.
So after this, we are going to say it again in this way. You have all to repeat with me, all of you. So
The
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 rod
rod
red
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 is
is
Monday.
Monday,
Monday.
Red,
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 orange
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 is
is
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
So this is an exemplification of what it would be in a silent way class, how to do it efficiently to grasp this new concept that is quite simple. It actually, the silent way is very efficient at teaching new concepts that are simple as that. Seriations of days, for example, or numbers.
Now we're going to talk about the teacher's role. The teacher, according to this methodology, must be silent because it is in this silence that the students will have an ideal environment for their learning efforts. Without interfering, the students will develop a completely different language acquisition. They will learn by themselves, and the teacher, even if they don't interfere in their students' learning process, has to work too, because the teacher teach and test, but they leave their students alone. Working like this and assuming the role of facilitator help learners in the journey of self-awareness and autonomy referred to language learning. Gattegno said that not interfering doesn't mean being totally absent from classes. The teachers have to readapt themselves, and it is a true odyssey because teachers are adapted to a different model that sometimes make hard to work with the silent way. Well, referring to the students play an essential role in the silent way, being active contributors and responsible for their learning, putting in a scene their knowledge to solve any difficulty in their daily classes. Gattegno says that language learning is a process of personal growth, resulting from growing student awareness and self-challenge. And this is expected if the student works without the teacher help. Pupils are also participants in the exploration of the language, focusing all their attention on it, because working completely independently, they process the language better because they choose the best model that fits them best. The students in this way are going to work cooperatively instead of competing with each other. Each one of these students is responsible for their classmates' success, and as a consequence, they end learning from each other. And something I should say about working cooperatively is that students eliminate that in the complex of individuality that is present in nowadays classes. The students learn how to listen to each other. They become teachers and they become good listeners too.
Okay, moving to interactions. Due to the nature of the method and the type of activities and techniques used to help students become fluent in the new language, interactions between teacher and students are very limited. Teachers use a word, phrase, or a sentence and wait for an answer produced by students. It's not like the teacher is not participating though. In fact, they are very much present, evaluating students and observing everyone's progress. Um, they kind of make it easier for students to get to the information, but stay out of their way when it comes to acquire learning and adjusting to the new language. On the other hand, students are required to work together. They must learn how to cooperate with each other instead of competing, and they should be comfortable with their classmates or other students as well, because they are going to correct and get correct by them all the time. One way of interacting between students is just talking with each other. One of them says something that they want to say, and then the conversation starts. And if someone wants to say something but they don't know how to do it, it is the errors that create a teachable moment. There is the only time that teachers can interrupt the conversation since they are not part of it. So they present the students with the correct way of saying what they are trying to say, while everyone else observes and learns from the mistakes. So now my partner Rafael is going to talk about the skills emphasized.
When it comes to the skills emphasized, do that, as I mentioned before, the main aims of this method is to acquire fluency of a native speaker or near one. It is very based in what the skills of speaking are about. For example, pronunciation. Though students are expected to catch the tone of the language, it says there, and they are not so based in the grammar rules. So it's very much in the speaking, however, not in the grammar part of the speaking when we are talking. Um, the method neglects two abilities, for example, reading and writing. However, there are people that use this silent way method and sometimes use some visual aids such as textbooks, although the majority of people that use this method, they do not like, from a theory of language perspective, the textbooks. So that, yes.
Okay. When talking about evaluation, we can say that it's carried out by observation of individual process, not by a normal test, as we know. In this case, the teacher looks for steady improvement and ability to transfer a skill to a new area of learning. Their task is to monitorize their student, observing the performance, allowing them to respond straight away to any problem that the student might have. They also ask some questions before giving feedback. So when evaluating students, teachers expect them to learn at different rates. Students are not penalized for learning more slowly than their classmates. We have to take into account that the teachers look for a steady progress in the language, not for perfection.
As it was said previously, errors are very common, and not only that, but they are also seen as something needed. They are in the learning process because they help students create their own criteria of what's right and what's wrong. Anyway, a student may be saying something that it's grammatically correct, but it's not being used on the correct circumstance. So they need to be, that needs to be corrected as well. Teachers don't offer direct correction though. It's just they let students compare what they are doing, their production and errors with their own criteria. And also the peer correction is really encouraged. This was already mentioned before, but this is when students help each other by correcting others' mistakes if they are able to. And another way of correction, of error correction, is by teachers using their hands. Instead of verbally saying what they are trying to correct, they gesture what they can be, what can be corrected. For example, if a student says a 4-word sentence, but that's supposed to be a 5-word sentence and a word is missing, the teacher will pull up their hands and place each word on their fingers. So now everyone can actually see where the word is missing, because they're going to be placing the word. They're going to be placing each word on each finger, but one finger won't have a word. So that's where something is missing. They can visually see the error. So this is a great way of correcting students' error, because it really helps them. It gives them that visual focus that helps them hold their sentence on their mind when they are having a hard time keeping it, like memorizing it, or if maybe it's too difficult for them. Or also the teacher can be as vague as they think it's needed. They just can even stay in silent if they want to, because they just pull up their fingers and that they let students correct their own mistakes by themselves. Also, another thing is that they can also group their fingers in different ways, so the students can know how to change the sentence so it flows easier. And basically this method draws the students' attention to the linguistic part and the grammatical part instead of the meaning of the language, because the linguistic and the grammatic rules is what needs more work when we're talking about someone that's learning a new language, basically. So yeah.
Well, after all that has been spoken about this method, we should talk about what is good about it and what is bad about it. As any method, it has its pros and cons, so we should speak about the advantages first. First of all, due to the fact that there is a absence of the teacher, this generates the ability of the students to talk with other students. So that enhances comparative learning in a way that if you don't have the response to a problem-solving question or task, you can actually, instead of ask the teacher, you will ask your students, like your fellow classmates or friends, in order to get that response that you are missing, and not it's not given by the teacher right away. There is also a development of self-awareness and self-criteria. This thing means that if you do not have the help of your classmates because they do not know it either, you can also start thinking by yourself, and even if you don't actually get the response that you are needed to, you um, you reason about it, and you are going to develop a self-awareness of the language that if you were given the response right away by one of your classmates or one of your teachers, is not going to be there and is not going to be developed. Also, self-criteria allows students to correct themselves, because if we have this situation in which we have responses that have to be given to the teacher, That also means that the next day that we have one error in our speaking, because this is very based on speaking, we are going to be able to say, well, if I have this self-awareness of language, this is what I'm missing, for example. Well, then when it comes to disadvantages, it can be very hard for students to understand new concepts or to follow the teacher in some classes. This is mainly because we have a very interactive way of acting with our teachers. This applies only if you have never been in this type of classes, because when you don't have any teacher that guides you, for me or for our classmates here, it is very hard because we are always accustomed to this kind of teachers that talk us or makes us to a hint or something to realize what the response is. Another thing for teachers to know is that it's very time consuming. Regarding the quality, some teachers that do give this type of classes of silent weight, they say that it's all about quality and not quantity, but we do think that in terms of quantity, the slight things that are given for 1 hour, in which 15 minutes are from pronunciation and the other ones is repetition and drilling, is quite extensive. So also this system is quite rigid because you cannot talk with your students, so they are going to get frustrated maybe, and you are not going to know how to sometimes give the concepts without talking. And if you actually believe in this of let them learn, is very going to be very difficult. And also the absence of a teacher, as I said before, is very difficult for the students to actually accustom to.
Okay, so finally, we're moving to the last part of the presentation. Nowadays, as of 2000s, the silent way was only used by a small number of teachers. Most likely, those teachers had work on a difficult situation. Maybe they work with refugees, or the conditions of the work were really challenging. So nowadays it's not really used anymore. Maybe not on its original form, but a lot of things had passed on into regular classes, maybe that don't follow the method 100%, but they really use some of these techniques when they're trying to work on pronunciation, because they're really helpful and they have led a lot to regular normal classes. It's a really great method.
Okay, this is the end of the presentation. I hope you like it. Thank you.